Hello and welcome to Business Unmuted, a business discussion broadcast live on LinkedIn and available for download from all the best podcast sites. As ever, Business Unmuted is sponsored by Virtue BMW, which is part of Gateshead-based Virtue Motors plc. If you're in the market for a new, used or fleet vehicle, its dealerships are in Stockton, Durham, Sunderland, Malton or York. I'm pleased to welcome to the studio today Martin Anderson, CEO and founder of Lemon Business Solutions, Ashley Fenwick, Sales Manager at My Property Box, and down the line we have David Moore, CEO of the British Constructional Steelwork Association. ONS data out today shows inflation ended 2021 on a significant upward trend, reaching 5.4%, the highest since March 1992. Mortgage lender Halifax has revealed that house prices in the UK rose at a faster rate in 2021 than any year since 2004, at just a touch under 10%. And employment figures show a contrast between different northern regions, a contrast between the northeast that has the highest rate of unemployment in the UK, just over 5%, 5.7%, and Yorkshire the lowest rates. And with COVID restrictions coming to an end and political uncertainty, there's lots to talk about this week. Let's start with you, Ashley, and COVID. We've got a big announcement from the Prime Minister as we are on air today, Wednesday, which is that in the next week, basically all the Plan B restrictions are finishing, even masks in shops by the 27th of January. What was your thought on that?
I think it's a good thing. I think we have to start living with this thing, so we've got to get back to a bit of normality. And yeah, I think it's a great thing. Working from home is going to be coming to an end. We're going to start getting offices back to the levels that they were before. So definitely, yeah, good thing.
I'm up for that answer. I noticed I had a business meeting today which had about 12 people invited, and around the table for breakfast, everyone lateral flow tested to come in. 3 people cried off, a quarter of them, with COVID. Right. Albeit, though, the Omicron variant isn't as severe as Delta. But I'm with you on that one. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely the same. We've all been waiting for it, haven't we? And speaking to the team in my office, everyone I speak to, they're saying the same thing. We're done with it now. We want to get on with our normal life. We want to get on with business. It's a new year. It's a new start. We really want to push ahead, and these restrictions need to move aside if the data's there and telling us if they're not required, they need to go. So yeah, I'm more than happy for them to be.
And we're recording this and broadcasting this from England. Do you think that, despite all the political shenanigans that are going on about parties, do you think that Boris Johnson and the government called it right before Christmas, or do you think they were over or under cautious?
I'm personally happy with how it went. They possibly were slightly overcautious, but I don't blame them for taking that tack, because better to have done that than to found themselves in a worse situation. And I think they've proven now where we are is the right place. Wide internationally, we're in a bit of a bubble, I think, in the UK and England. We're in quite a good place now, but travelling might still be difficult, and when we move out the UK into Europe or wider field, there's going to be challenges there. But I'm really pleased that we're going to go into the end of January, into February, into this new year without those restrictions. We can just get on with doing our business.
Now, as we're recording this and transmitting it live on Wednesday night, sort of 5 o'clock on Wednesday evening, we don't know how Boris Johnson's term of office as Prime Minister is going. We know that he's under a lot of criticism. We know there's a report coming out. We know lots of Tory MPs are submitting letters for a confidence vote. So let's not comment on necessarily the party politics of it, but how would you feel if there was a change of leadership of Prime Minister from a business point of view? Well, let's start with you, Ashley.
I think it's a difficult one because there's so much going on anyway. We could really do with not having the upheaval of a change of that magnitude at the moment. But I understand people's way of thinking that it needs to go but it's a difficult one, I think, to keep things moving onwards. We've got to keep that level.
As we know from Theresa May going and from David Cameron going, a Prime Minister going is de facto a change of government. Not all right, a party change of government, but you still get sometimes subtle differences in policy. The policy differences between Theresa May and David Cameron were quite pronounced, and on Brexit for Boris Johnson very pronounced. And I get the feeling that businesses are sick of change and they'd rather like a bit of stability, and we've got a government with a majority, and really we want to just see the Parliament through and let people decide at the right time? What do you think?
The biggest concern is it's not so much a change in leadership. I can understand why we should probably do that. My concern is we Boris Johnson moves on, a new leader comes in, then there's a snap election, and then anything can happen. And that's really why I don't want to go down the road of. My personal belief is he probably should move aside and someone else should take in, because he's damaging the Conservative brand. But I really worry about an election coming up. We don't need that right now. We've had enough. We just need some stability going forward.
Okay, we talked about a couple of things there in our studio. Let's go down the line. We've got David Moore from the British Constructional Steel Association. Let's talk about the COVID thing first, because I suppose in your sector, you're somewhat immune from some of the restrictions because you can't work at home and produce steel.
You're right, Graham. I mean, COVID's been quite different in the construction sector. Apart from a few weeks at the start of the actual pandemic back in 2020, when construction sites were getting used to actually putting risk assessments in place, the construction industry has been working as normal, if you like, actually through the whole of the actual pandemic. The same actually is true for steelwork contractors who actually fabricate and erect steel structures. They've been working largely as normal. As you say, you can't actually weld and cut and drill steel at home.
Well, let's just move on then for you, David. I mentioned at the top of our conversation the new data on inflation and the general economic position. In the northeast, unemployment's ticked up. It hasn't gone up too much, but it's significant enough to be top of the regional league tables again, which is a bit exasperating. Yorkshire, the opposite, the lowest. All of this feeds into big industry, doesn't it, David? Inflation first, 5.4%, I think it was. What do you see as the inflationary trends in your industries?
In talking to actually BCSA steel contractor members, they probably wouldn't recognise the actual 5.4% increase in inflation. If you look over the past year, the prices of construction materials have actually gone up quite rapidly. I mean, steel, concrete, timber, masonry have all increased enormously. Steel itself has actually doubled in price over 8 months of last year. But in spite of that, we do actually see the construction industry taking off. We've probably got an 18.6% increase. And particularly with steel, we actually see it taking, if you like, the lion's share of the constructional steelwork market for factories and for office buildings. So despite the actual large increase in material prices, clients are still confident of actually building in steelwork.
Let's drill down, because that inflationary price of steel obviously has an effect in the wider economy, particularly in the construction of buildings. We can talk about housing a little later, but construction generally is affected by it. What is the principal cause behind the price increase in steel?
There are a number of causes, Graham. Initially, back in the sort of early 2020s, when countries around the world were coming out of the pandemic, you've got countries like China increasing the amount of steel they actually make and buying, if you like, quite a lot of the iron ore from places like Australia and Brazil. That means that the price of iron ore actually increased quite rapidly, and that actually put pressure on steel prices in the rest of the world. And then we see the prices of things like coking coal. We used to actually make steel that was going up later in the year. And then now we have price increases coming through from transport increases and from energy price increases. Clearly, industries which use lots of energy are going to actually sort of see pressure on price inflation in the coming months.
I attended a breakfast meeting this morning. I mentioned earlier that this meeting looked at geopolitical issues and price pressures on the economy. And there were two interesting points. The first was that the Ukraine crisis has a double whammy in the steel sector, because Ukraine consumes energy and charges energy tariffs to put Russian gas through it, and there's an energy problem because of the conflict potentially emerging there. And also Ukrainian steel is in part of the Ukraine which is potentially contested in any kind of conflict that may emerge. And Ukrainian steel is quite a large part of the sector. And then the second point that was made was that when it comes to coking coal and other fossil fuels, getting finance for projects to extract fossil fuels is increasingly difficult as green pressure groups mount on investors, particularly in the City of London and Western democracies.
I mean, you're right in terms of the environmental and sustainability initiatives, Graham. I mean, in the UK, we've just launched our roadmap to net zero by 2050, bringing together not just the steel makers, but the steel contractors, the fabricators, the designers, the actual stockholders, bring them all together to actually work together to actually create a net zero roadmap towards 2050. And we hope that many of the actual parts industry can get there sooner, but it does actually mean large amounts of investment in different ways of actually sort of making green steel. And that investment's got to come from somewhere, where it comes from actually incentives from government or where it comes from investment in the industry. And that will clearly be passed on to the consumer at some point. So we might see inflationary pressures coming through there at some point, Graham.
Okay, let's go up and down the panel. We'll return to you in a moment, David. Inflation, you're hearing what David's saying. This is real biting inflation, Martin.
Yeah.
You're in a general business sector, like
Yeah.
me in PR. You're in
Yeah.
consumer services with Lemon Business Solutions. It affects us, doesn't it? What's happening in David's sector all filters through.
Costs are going up. It's the only way of doing it. We're running a business like a household, like Margaret Thatcher would have said, and all our costs are going up. The cost of everything we're buying into the business, and the cost of employment. The NI is going up, obviously, in April. Everything's becoming more expensive. So we either have the option of putting our own prices up, which is obviously just exacerbating the problem, or just taking a hit in our profit. And it's important not to be greedy. And we see plenty of bigger companies out there just saying, right, we're going to put all our prices up, and without naming them, and it's just all for shareholder greed. But we still have to survive, and we want money to reinvest, especially in the region, and put money back into our business, back into our technology, back into and to grow further, to strengthen it. And as we're being squeezed, it's just becoming harder and harder. You know, it's part of life. There's always going to be inflation. We've been lucky to have low inflation rates for quite a long time now. I think this is the biggest increase since about the early 90s, 92 or something similar. Yeah. So we're going to have to just accept it and take it on the chin. And I don't think we can sit here and moan about it as business owners. But it doesn't mean it's not difficult, but we'll have to roll the punches. And you know what? We will.
And we've also got a productivity issue in the country generally, don't we? It's not just a private sector productivity issue. The work from home stuff can affect productivity, not always positively. Local authorities with staff absences have productivity issues. I know in my part of the world, in County Durham, a relative of mine is buying a house, and it has taken a very long time to get the searches back. So there's a delay in that deal. How do you feel about that kind of impact on your market in housing?
Yeah, it does have a huge impact, because if the average sale is taking possibly double what it was taking prior to COVID, then you've got less sales coming through the pipeline, so less money coming through. And so I think it is all about a balance, isn't it, really? But we are finding it quite difficult with the process taking so long, and the longer the process takes, the more chance there is of the sale falling through. Because our ways of selling houses in England, here, is that until it gets through to completion, you can pull out at any stage. So right up until that exchange of contract, a buyer or a seller can pull out, and there's quite a lot of money being spent on the process up until that point. So whereas we were getting sales through in about 8 to 10 weeks, now it's definitely a good 16 weeks for a sale to get through. So
the cost of housing is a very big impact on inflation. We've just heard David talking about the cost of construction, but actually buying a house, and of course cost of housing has gone up in several ways, hasn't it? It's gone up in terms of the cost of buying a house, it's gone up in the cost of borrowing the money to buy a house, in interest rates and so on. But is that having an impact on house prices yet? Are you seeing any stabilisation?
Well, it did dip in November, so it had gone really bad, really mad over the course of last year, but it did dip in November, which is the normal for our industry for Christmas. And so we're just starting to see how it's coming back, and it seems to be coming back just as strong. So the house prices look as if they're going to be staying quite high over the course of this year by the look of it. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to David on this inflation issue. Your members obviously have to transport their end product. Transport is both a labour cost and a fuel cost, and I should imagine transport costs must be biting.
Transport costs have actually gone up quite high. You're right, Graham. I mean, my brother-in-law owns a transport company, got 400 trucks, and I understand from talking to him that he's increased the actual salary pays to HGV drivers by 30% over the past year.
That is a massive
that's an
increase.
enormous increase.
Yeah.
Yes.
And but there's an element of stabilisation there as well, isn't there? There's been a tiny little bit of change by the government on allowing visas for HGV. Not that much, but is it stabilising in your view?
I think it's, in talking to my brother-in-law, it is stabilising. Yes, we also see sort of wage expectations in my industry as being very, very high. People are expecting quite high levels of wage inflation going forward. The demands might well be unrealistic.
Martin, wages. I'm not going to ask you what you pay your wages, but it is likely that smaller business owners, and you and I have a smaller business, are going to face wage pressures. But of course, with the smaller business, the market rate has to be tied to prices and affordability. So perhaps it is right to grit your teeth and say no sometimes.
It is. I mean, I'm a champion of the real living wage anyway. So prior to Rishi's announcement in the budget about putting the minimum wage up, I was all for that in a way. And I think it's important as business owners, we're investing in our team and paying a good wage and giving them opportunities both inside and outside of work. But as we get inflation and we get everything starts to bite together, you can get a perfect storm. So it does make it difficult. And then you have to think, you've got to make difficult choices in a business which we don't want to be faced. So.
But productivity deals, I mean, David's had a lot of experience in industry over his years, and productivity deals don't seem to be discussed these days as much as they were, do they?
Oh, sorry, Graham. No, you're right. I think
productivity deals was an industry norm when unions and management got around the table, and the unions say we want the market rate, and the management say we can't afford the market rate, and in the end a productivity deal was settled on, wasn't it?
I mean, at the moment it tends to be sort of individual companies sort of settling deals with their own individual sort of labour forces, and in many cases some companies are actually sort of paying a little bit extra in terms of wages in order to retain their staff. They're concerned that they actually might be go to other companies because of sort of high wages.
And where do you think about this, Martin? You're in a white-collar business, Dave's in a blue-collar business. Is a productivity deal the right approach?
It can be. Just to touch on that point as well, we as an employer, we have to be an attractive employer now. It's changed over the course of the pandemic, really. So wages and other sort of benefits that we provide are very, very important to attract and retain staff as well. I mean, productivity is critically important in my industry. It's about efficiency, and we can measure that. It's a key metric of the efficiency of our staff, and that's important because it makes our whole business commercial viability at work. So yes, I do agree, productivity and efficiency are absolutely vitally important. One thing I would say though, the overall sort of figures that we're looking at for the region, sort of with the high unemployment, etc., which whilst it is concerning when we think about levelling up and where we're trying to go, the whole levelling up agenda and the investment, particularly in the northeast, in my mind, is a juggernaut. It's like trying to turn the Titanic around. We're not going to see change overnight. I think we've set off out of port now. We're in the right direction. I wouldn't want people to get too worried about these immediate figures. There's a long way to go, and we don't want to have knee-jerk reactions to what's going on.
We'll have a levelling up white paper coming out in the next few weeks, and it's probable that the Tees Valley in the northeast, and to a certain extent West Yorkshire, and to a certain extent north of Tyne, will become models for the way the regions are governed. So you'll end up with a mayor for North Yorkshire and combined authority. So the sort of Ben Houchen approach, may not be the individual, may not be someone like Ben Houchen, will be replicated. Now, you're selling houses in Tees Valley, and there is a real levelling up. They fly off the shelf, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen a massive change in Darlington especially. It's become its own little bubble, because of the Treasury come in and all the rest of the things that are going on. So it really has, the house prices in Darlington in particular have probably seen, quite the biggest growth, really. And, that is just down to that fact, really. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to round it up there. Thank you very much, David, for talking to us. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Ashley. By the way, next week I've got Sir Michael Fallon, the former Defence Secretary, on just for a short interview looking at the Ukrainian political situation, the prospect of military conflict there, and how it affects things like our energy prices and stability in Europe. And then we'll talk to people about that on next week's Business Unmuted. Join us then live 5 o'clock on Wednesday, and then you can pick it up on podcasts and different platforms thereafter. Thank you very much.